whilst they monitor everything else that's going on. And it's a very interesting concept that has a lot more to be written. And it's a story that I've entitled, I think, Atreyu, the Snake Boy, or something along those lines. Because it revolves around a creature that's not supposed to be there. Somehow this snake comes onto this island. And there's a lot of other aspects that are interesting. So Bermuda Triangle type situations act as your teleportation method, essentially. So they can order tea from England during the 1800s, and it will arrive on time at a port that appears to be the right kind of port, and then they just make sure that they leave the same teleportation system and arrive where they're supposed to be. It just appears as though they stopped at a port that they never actually stopped at. So essentially, if you had 3 ports along a line, let's say one is New York, the other is Philadelphia, and the other is Boston. You have 3 ports along a line. Let's say an order gets placed very cleverly into the books for a certain good, widgets, we'll say, in New York. The ship will then leave from Boston on its way to deliver those things to New York, and then maybe a disturbance will occur, maybe not. The ship will find itself not arriving in New York, going through a teleportation field, essentially, dropping off the goods, and then continuing on its route. And clever things done with the books, etc., make sure that this is completely facilitated soundly. And it works out pretty good. So they can essentially import anything they'd like on this island from any point in time. And via that, they keep themselves well stocked on things like danked cookies and Coca-Cola in glass bottles. So it works out very well for them. In any case, the simulation notion and any number of other notions is a fun thing to think through. And if you've ever lived in the world long enough to notice any number of fascinations, then you have no choice but to invariably have some sort of faith. You can't escape it because, well, certain things just don't happen, do they? So, whether or not you'll speak about them, you exist, you nod to them, and, well, you attribute them to one thing or another. Some would like to say glitch in the Matrix, and some would like to say God. I'm on the team of people who attribute a lot of things to God, including some of the more hairy situations that we have as byproducts of essentially creating things that would act as our computer's AI in our own simulations. That is, creating an AI, you're not necessarily going to get the results you want. So, depending upon the situation, you end up with something a little hairier or not. And then if you look through any number of learning softwares, essentially kind of not really AI, who learn to play things like video games, I can watch them sometimes for an hour or more. You'll see something very, very fascinating in that this computer will run through all of these different variations of a given level, changing things as quickly as it thinks it can, which is a stupid way of putting it, to eventually beat the level that you've given it to try to solve the puzzle. And there's value in that. But then you're only going to have one that actually completes the puzzle in that particular case, which is very gloom and doom if, say, you live in the world, simulation or not, and your hope is to ascend to the heavens or otherwise end up in a better place. So, presumably, it's not quite that. But that's something to consider. because if you're trying to find something with the right fit, like a key into a lock, you have to take into account all of the things that are, well, crucial to that lock opening. In fact, because of that, I just designed a key today and a lock, and the key mechanism is not all that different than a standard key is today, except I've added 4 extra pins that aren't really pins. Essentially, there would be 4 light-emitting diodes in the lock, and all of them give off a certain frequency, and then they have to pass through a substrate. And when they pass through a substrate, well, they act more or less in the same sort of way that Newton and Newton's prisms acted. As the light passes through, certain wavelengths go through and reach the other side. And if the right wavelengths go through, then one of the pins loosens up and allows you to move it. If the light does not reach the other side at all, the pins are locked. If the light goes through and it's the wrong kind of light, then an alarm is triggered, if you have a household alarm. So it's a very good design as far as things go in trying to keep things locked up. Because essentially, in order for the light to reach the other side, it has to travel through this key. And in order for that to occur, you have to have this key in place, or you have to have just one more thing jammed in there, which makes picking a lock very, very difficult. And the way that it's designed, it should make it more or less impossible to do. At least for now. And I'm going to go brush my teeth, so maybe I'll continue this in a minute. And now I'm recording again. Now you, if you were just listening to the recording, have no idea how much time went by. But for a reference, and for the sake of making my claim involving the simulation, even though this is a recording and not a simulation, the current time is now 12:11 p.m. or a.m., excuse me. Which means that I was in the bathroom and or otherwise taking care of, well, things that I do before going to bed for at least 6 minutes. At least. It might have been more than 6 minutes, in fact. I don't remember. I wasn't exactly keeping track. But I did glance the clock while I was brushing my teeth, and it was 11:56. So, what just happened there? That was essentially a situation where this recording, not being a simulation granted, but a recording, was paused, and I said I'll be back in a few minutes, which is both true and false. It's true because I was gone from, well, recording this for several minutes. There was a gap. But the gap in time that you would have noticed on this particular recording that is unedited would have been a second maybe, or 2 seconds, and that's it. So there's a fun situation, because I was both gone for several minutes, and I was not gone for several minutes. To your ears, I never left, essentially. Maybe a second passed, maybe 2, maybe 5, I don't know. I haven't listened to the recording yet, which is the fun and amusement in the whole thing, isn't it? In any case, let me make my way towards my room and shut these lights off. Furthermore, I think it elicits a very, very important point, at least in this particular recording, with regards to how things might be perceived if you were in a simulation. Since I was gone for 6 minutes at least, and since you did not wait for 6 minutes on the other end of this recording device, the listening end, well, guess what? That means that something happened, and yet nothing happened, which is beautiful. Isn't it, conceptually? I mean, if you follow what I'm trying to say or state here, and you follow the logic between saying I was both gone for a few minutes and I was not gone for a few minutes, then you understand one of many things that our AI in the simulation might experience. And no, I am not trying to convince you that you are an AI in a simulation. That would be something, but it would probably not be good for you. I recommend you consider this the real world every minute of every day. I recommend you consider that God exists every minute of every day, because how you understand things, and even your own existence, may completely and utterly be, just based on that, just that notion alone. Because, think about that. That 6-minute gap there, where things happened, but nothing is recorded on this recording. If we were looking at that as a pause of the world, not just a recording, well, guess what? You wouldn't have noticed a thing. And in fact, had I not said I'll be back in a minute, and then taken 6, well, there would be no evidence one way or another. I could have, in fact, just paused the machine after saying my last few words there, and then started it again immediately after I'd finished what I was doing. And in fact, I could do that at any particular point on this recording. In fact, if I do that right now, and then start it again, you didn't hear me say the quote-unquote, because I did say this, and say a few words. Because I said that, but I'd paused the recording for a moment there. Now that's getting kind of confusing, isn't it? Not really. If you follow, then you get it. If you don't, then you don't. Don't worry about it if you don't. You can always talk to me or anyone else, assuming we're still around. If not, well, just read, study, and learn. Know that God exists, God is good, and God wants you to be good. So that you can exist, well, more or less eternally, and help with the more amusing bits. More so than the less amusing bits. Because there will always be jobs that no one else wants to do. And who do you put in those positions that amount to jobs no one else wants to do? Presumably, if you could, you'd put robots there, because robots would autonomously, seemingly, do their own work, leave you alone, get the job done, and require whatever it is that robots require to exist and continue doing what they do. Isn't that a beautiful concept, though? Now, I'm going to turn this off because it's a little past midnight, and I am actually tired this evening. I was tired before I started this recording, but I wanted to record that particular melody or two, and I went on a bit of a tangent about God, belief in God, etc. And honestly, kind of like you didn't hear me say those few words, would it have been that hard to have just started with something, put something else, and then via that layering convinced any number of people one thing or another? In Bulgaria, when they nod their head up and down, it means no. And when they turn it from side to side, it means yes. It cannot be all that impossible to do certain things, especially with more power, technology, understanding, wisdom, etc., than any man on the face of the planet might possess during all of the ages through time. Have a good night, or afternoon, morning, or whenever it is there, because here it's night.